So I just recently bought a property from a wholesaler where the seller made, I believe it was 38, 33, something like that, $1,000. The wholesaler made $55,000. And this got me thinking about, why I love to hate or hate to love wholesalers. So in this video, I'll go over a little bit about what a wholesaler is, how it benefits the consumer, how it benefits an investor, and maybe some pros and cons, if there are any, for each side. So what is a wholesaler? Well, you've seen their advertisements all over the place. Every time you stop at a stoplight, you see their signs. We pay cash for houses. We close quickly. Or, their commercials. We buy your house in 7 days, that kind of stuff. So these are basically unlicensed, unregulated individuals who scour the countryside looking for distressed sellers. These are typically people who are possibly facing foreclosure, possibly facing bankruptcy, possibly the house is in probate and the heirs want to, get rid of it quickly. Or the biggest factor is they're usually pretty rundown houses, and the sellers believe that they can't sell these houses on the open market, either for enough money because there's additional fees, realtor commissions, and maybe it takes longer. The sellers are under the impression that those things are real. So the wholesaler essentially makes a deal with the seller and they put the property under contract. Now, the wholesaler never intends to actually close on that property. Their whole intention is to sell not the property, but the contract to an end buyer, typically an investor, for less than fair market value. So they have specific contracts that they use that says that the contract can be assigned. They set a price and terms and a closing date with the original seller. Let's say it's 15 days for $50,000. They then turn around and sell that contract to an end buyer, typically an investor, for more money than that $50,000. So as an example, they tell the seller, we'll pay you $50,000 for the property. They turn around and sell that contract to an investor for $100,000, and the wholesaler walks away with $50,000. Seller walks away with $50,000, and the end buyer, the investor, pays $100,000. So how does this benefit the seller? Well, typically they get a cash price and a very short closing date. It's headache free generally. I mean, they don't always have to clean out the property. There's generally no prep that needs to be done. They remove from what they want. They can leave everything else in the property. I bought had furniture, junk, 20 years of junk, 20 years of dishes, frying pans. There was a pot in the refrigerator that still had food in it. I mean, that's how, quick somebody wanted to get out of the property. And, that sometimes that's a little bit difficult to deal with when you're putting a house on the open market. Not always, and I'll get into more details about that later. But the benefits to the seller are generally, this is the amount of money I'm going to make. This is my timeline. When it's all said and done, boom, walk away. I'm finished. A lot less hassle, could be a lot less hassle, a lot less stress. I'll get into the downsides in a little bit. So how does this benefit the investor? Well, usually it's less competition. The fewer people that have eyes on the property, the less competition the investor, the end buyer, has. Well, less competition generally means a lower price. Now, if an investor has a good relationship with a wholesaler, sometimes the wholesaler will just send those deals straight to their investor or a small pool of investors. If it's a large wholesale company, then you still might have some competition. So just as an example, in my case, I really didn't save a lot of money than if I had bought the property on the open market. When you're in these wholesale situations, the investor generally has to pay all the closing costs. They don't have time for inspections. In my case, I actually had to make the offer before I could even view the property. Now, I was allowed to make concessions after the fact for some things that I found wrong with the property that weren't disclosed in the original offer, but you know that was okay. So for the investor, it's a way to find properties that aren't distributed widely to the open market. Less competition can sometimes get a lower price than if it had been listed on the open market. So, what are the cons to the investor to buy a wholesale deal? Well, there aren't a lot. I mean, buying a wholesale deal is akin to buying something that's in the open market. The differences are is you don't if you're dealing with a wholesaler who you don't know, who isn't known and trusted, that's where you could run into some difficulties. Remember, you're not buying the property per se, you're buying the contract. And if that is the contract with the original seller passes through the wholesaler to the investor. And if that's not a if the wholesaler doesn't have a good contract with the buyer or with the original seller, then you can run into some difficulties. If there are things that are undisclosed, who do you go after for those undisclosed items? If you find something after you've settled on the property that is seriously wrong with the house and it was never disclosed, who do you go after? Well, you can't really go after the wholesaler. Um, can't really go after the seller because they weren't required to disclose because it wasn't in the original contract. So you can run into some shortfalls. If the investor does their due diligence and really checks, make sure the title work is good, does their good inspections, has their contractor look at the property, then it's usually okay. Um, and like I said, their biggest benefit might be the price and the availability of the property. So what are the cons to the seller? Well, basically, it's money. They're leaving a lot of money on the table. And in my specific scenario, roughly $55,000, because on the open market, that home probably would have sold for around 95 to $100,000 in its current condition. Now, as a real estate agent, I could have done practically the exact same thing that the wholesaler did. One caveat to that: from the time the seller signed the contract with the wholesaler to the time we went to settlement was 15 days. Now, listing agreement to settlement as a real estate agent, 15 days might be a little bit tough. Not all wholesalers can get it done in 15 days. This specific one that I bought from um, has their own team. They work closely with a settlement company. It's a very large outfit. And they work closely with the settlement company. And they had actually already started title work as soon as they got the contract signed. So, in essence, it was almost like contract to close was 15 days, not list to close. However, putting that aside, I can still usually get a home sold pretty quickly on an investor grade property. And we can do all of the same things that a wholesaler does. And you're actually going to get more eyes on the property if you put it out to the open market than wholesalers, because wholesalers lists are limited. And every investor not only has their access to their off market wholesale properties, but they're always checking the MLS for properties as well. So it's not like I'd be excluding any investors to that property. So, aside from maybe adding a week or so to the period of contact to close, um, a home seller is typically leaving a lot of money on the table by selling to a wholesaler. And not to mention, if the wholesaler is not a reputable wholesaler, then they actually could waste more of the seller's time. These contracts that the wholesalers use always benefit the wholesaler. They give the wholesaler a way to get out of the contract should the wholesaler not be able to sell the property. And these contracts are drawn up by the wholesaler's attorney or on some online forum, and they protect the wholesaler, not the consumer. You have to remember that a wholesaler is an unlicensed, unregulated individual. They are just any bloke off the street. So there are no regulations that protect the consumer from any mischievous contracts or claims or statements that a wholesaler is making. And honestly, legally, ethically, and certainly financially, I don't think it's rarely in the consumer's best interest or a seller's best interest to go through a wholesaler. There are maybe some rare occasions when it might benefit them, but ultimately, listing with the real estate agent or listing it by some other means, but getting it out on the open market is usually going to be your best bet. So, in summary, as an investor, yes, I kind of like wholesalers. I do feel that they do perform a service to the general public as a whole by helping some of these properties that otherwise might sit or deteriorate over time. They help to turn those properties over in the marketplace. Um, so that could be one generalized benefit. However, the real estate or the realtor side of me says that they really do take advantage of home sellers in desperate situations that might really need the money. And instead of collecting more of their equity of the house, they're turning that over for very large profits to these wholesalers. So I think it's a double-edged sword. Personally, I would prefer to see them regulated, and I know some states and some jurisdictions are moving towards that. So in a nutshell, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with them.